I am, so there you go. Anyway, on to the headliner, Andrew Scheps. Now, he's mixed for bands like, wow, U2, Adele, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and a bunch of other stuff. I used to try to keep track of his discography, but I gave up because it's really long. Kind of like all the racks of gear in his cool studio that I try not to think about because I get really jealous and sad and go, here I am in a cubicle writing code. I could be mixing records on cool equipment and hanging out with famous people and just, living my life and seeing the sun every once in a while. And anyway, where were we? Oh, so Andrew Scheps. I'm done talking. Take it away.
Thanks, Tom. Wow, it's not nearly as glamorous as he makes it sound. The only reason I ever see the sun is because I have a skylight in my studio, and that's it. And that's how I know it's nighttime. So I don't have anything in particular to talk about. There are a couple things I definitely wanted to say, in particular about the McDSP stuff, because I've owned McDSP plugins since McDSP was McDSP. The very first third-party plugins I ever bought were the filter bank and compressor bank set, which are still around and still awesome. And they were also, coming up to the present day, the first third-party plugins, I think, to get on AXDSP, which for me was huge because I was transitioning to these new cards and I didn't have a new computer and my computer was not so very fast and I was used to using everything on the DSP cards. So to have everything available and all the tools I was used to actually running on DSP right away was amazing. And we can take a lot of questions, but there's one plugin in particular of the new plugins which I've been using lately, which is amazing, which is the AE400. So it's an active EQ, and on the face of it, it looks sort of kind of like it's the same thing as a 4-band compressor, where you split the audio up into 4 bands and you have control over the crossover network to decide where those bands are and how they overlap. And then you treat each band separately. And it sort of looks and sort of acts as though it's doing compression, but what it's actually doing is changing how much you EQ, as opposed to compressing and expanding within those ranges. So I've used it on a couple of records recently where I've had a vocalist where when they sing quietly, they need a lot of mid-range added to get the presence out in their voice. And then when they start belting, it goes super nasal and crazy. And I was starting to split the vocal onto a couple of different tracks and things, and then the AE400 actually came out, and I got my email to say, hey, there's an AE400, you should check it out. And I got it, and I'm going to throw this back over to Colin to sort of explain how it works, but it's magic, and it's completely different from a multi-band compressor, and it lets you do things to sound in such a way that where you used to feel like I need to automate the EQ or split something up or have it on 3 different tracks to decide how I'm going to process different things, it's now really easy to get an amazing EQ curve that actually changes based on the input, which is spectacular. So just going to throw it over to Colin for a sec, because I don't understand it well enough. I always start with a preset that gets me close, and then I tweak stuff until I break it, then I go back to the preset and I tweak stuff again, and then it's cool, and I find something that works. But I want Colin to tell you how it works.
Well, let's see if I know how it works. So like Andrew said, it's active equalization, but like an EQ, all the bands are totally overlapping. You got your gain, you got your frequency, and you got your Q. Q. But what's different about it, like Andrew was saying, is that there's an active component. Whoops, I don't want to do that. Sorry. Don't panic. It's okay. I'm okay. Sorry, I panicked there. I'm okay. I'm back.
He only wrote it.
Right. So there's an active gain component here. And you can see here in band number 1, when I'm messing around with it, that I can have like a positive active gain or a negative active gain. And what the heck does that mean? So if I hit play here on the audio, which you're not going to hear, but you see how this band is changing, this white line is being drawn? So as signal level is going above this threshold here, and again in band number 1, it's going to go from the solid curve, the static EQ response, to sort of the darkened, the lightened curve behind it, that active EQ response. So what you get is you have, like Andrew said, there's 2 states of the EQ. There's a state of the EQ when you're quiet, and there's a state of the EQ when you're louder, or when you exceed some threshold that you select. And then like an EQ, it's only going to operate on those frequencies. So if you have a big wide band, it's going to operate in a lot of frequencies. You have a big narrow band, it'll operate on just those frequencies. So like if you have like a very nasal singer, you're like, oh, I know he's killing me like at 1.7K. I just need something at 1.7K or whatever that is. You can dial that in as narrow or as wide as you want, and then you can have that EQ response be one shape when they're quiet and then a different shape when they're loud. And that is, unfortunately, one of the problems with pro audio today is that it's on a computer. It's supposed to be magic. You know what you're doing, go for it. And whether you're Andrew Scheps or you're Colin McDowell, you're always going to get projects that you're like, wow, what am I going to do with this? And then you just have to, they'll look at you, your client looks at you blank faced and says, hey, I'll be back tomorrow. Good luck. And you're just like, that's what it's for.
Yeah. So, and the genius of it is that you've got this either positive gain or negative gain. So in my case for the vocal, I was using negative gain. So as he got louder within that frequency range, it would stop EQing, basically. It never got to the point where it was taking it away, but it would get to the point where it was flat in that frequency range. But the other thing you could do is think about it the other way, like the positive gain he's got down at the bottom. Let's say you've got some tom tracks, and you want to add a bunch of low end when he hits the toms, and you don't want to gate the toms because it's too much the sound of the kit. But if you leave all that low end added to the tom mics when he's not playing the toms, then the kick gets really thuddy and weird. So you could set it up to only EQ the low end in when he hits the tom. And it's really brilliant. It's a very different way to think about EQ because it's basically like you're sitting there holding the knob, and every time something happens above or below a certain threshold, you turn the knob, but it does it for you, which is a really different thing to the multiband compression, where you're actually changing the level of things rather than just changing EQ. And having EQ change shape or get tighter, it's pretty mind-blowing. So anyway, that's one of my favorite new things that this man has done. And then like the ultimate EQ, just like the ultimate compressor, I use a lot of parallel processing. So one of the things I love to do is I'll set up a parallel compression chain, and if I don't have something in mind for what sort of compression I think it should be, I'll pop the ultimate compressor in and just start cycling through. Like, oh, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's good. Okay, so now I got 4 choices, and then I go back to those and start tweaking them, and it's really cool, and especially because you don't have long dropouts while you're inserting the different plugin, and you can save settings, and so and they're all, I mean, do any of them have more than 4 knobs? It's all really simple interface, exactly what you get. But the great part is because it's all within the same plugin, as you cycle through, you're really getting a good comparison between the different types of compression, because everything else about it is exactly the same except the compression engine that kicks in as you switch it. So it's not like you got to go through and set up every single compressor and then cycle through. You can really kind of dial in and then pop through and just check things out, because a lot of times I have no idea what I want to use on something. I mean, absolutely no idea. And so a way for me to just cycle through, it's like on old synths you used to cycle through presets while you played along with a song, just like, hey, I don't know what's going to work. And to be able to do the same thing with gear is awesome. So I do that quite a bit. So, I mean, I think questions are probably more useful than me making stuff up. So,
okay. Any questions for Andrew?
All right.
This is kind of just an interesting question for me that I'd like to ask you. What would be the longest time you could spend mixing on a track for someone, and maybe the shortest time?
Okay. The longest and the shortest time I spend mixing on things. So these are extreme examples, but in the last year, like the Black Sabbath records, some of those mixes took 6 days, 7 days, and then had to be recalled and do something else. And now they're 10-minute songs. There are a lot of people involved, so that took forever. And then there was a record for my label that I started mixing at 10 in the morning, and I had to meet somebody for dinner at 7, and I mixed the whole record. So, yeah, so I think that I got about 40 minutes per song. And both records sound pretty good, actually. Well, to be honest, I think the thing for me with the ear fatigue is, first of all, I've got a pair of old tannoys that I love, and they're very bright, but they're not harsh at all. And generally, I only work loud at the beginning. Once I feel like the power in the drums and the vocal is cool, then I can work really quietly for hours and hours and hours. I crank it up to make sure that stuff is still there. But if you get your balance right, you can turn it way down and do the rides, and you can actually hear better, because when it's loud, your brain's doing all kinds of stuff to try and get away from it. So to feel the power of the kick drum, you have to crank it, but just try not to work loud for too long, and take breaks. And another thing is, I mix on tons of gear sometimes, but I actually lately have been mixing more in the box because it lets me cycle through songs. So now when I need a break, instead of having to just sit there and wait to be ready, I'll just open up another song. Even if I'm not going to work on it, I'll open it up and let it play quietly in the background, and it gives me a break without actually taking a break. So just getting fresh perspective is, I think, the best way to do that. Yeah. It completely depends on the plugin. He's asking if I usually start with presets. And with something like the AE400, which now I actually understand way better than I did 5 minutes ago, I will start with a preset because I don't quite understand how it works, and I'm assuming that whoever did the presets actually knows and had some material running through. So I'll do it, and it's not like I'm looking for a preset that's named the thing that I'm doing. It's more that I'll put something through the plugin and then call up a bunch of presets, the ones that are supposed to be for the thing I'm doing, and a bunch that are absolutely not for the thing I'm doing, because then I can see how it reacts to different stuff. And it's just I'm really lazy, and I hate reading manuals, and I'm old, and I can't retain stuff anymore. So the best way for me to learn is just to slam through presets and watch what the plugin does. And then usually I'll either just say, okay, now I got it, and then I start from scratch every time. Or with something like the A400, where there's so many parameters, because we only saw half of the parameters on the screen. You can switch to the crossovers, which is a totally different thing than the EQ. So for something like that, then usually I'll get a little catalog in my head of, okay, these are the presets that I like, and I don't remember what I like them on, but they're familiar names to me, and so that's a starting point. And sometimes I just put it on and oh, that's great, and I'm done, and sometimes I'll tweak. I certainly don't have a theory about whether you should or you should, if it sounds good, move on, So, yeah, it just depends on the plugin, though. Yeah. Right. The question was, when I'm working really fast, how do I make the songs have their own thing to them? So specifically that record was kind of a psych garage punk record sort of thing. So in that case, everything that was different just came from them, and they tracked the record in 2 days. So it was 3 days to make the record start to finish. Very, very simple, very few overdubs, bass, drums, 2 guitars, and the drum kit was kick, snare, tom, hat, crash. That's it. So there's almost nothing on the record. So for me, it was like mixing front of house. It was learn the performance and then do tons of rides and just make everything as exciting as possible. So when the guitar comes in, make it way too loud. Nothing is subtle, and that's what made that record happen. But I wasn't really trying to make it sound different. I want it to sound like you drop the needle on a show and holy shit, and 25 minutes later and 12 songs, you're done, and that's it. So, yeah, I'm not... I let each song sort of mix itself based on what's there. I'm never trying to impose my will on it. Every once in a while I'll get super inspired and really hear something, and I'll add a lot in the mix, but usually I'm just trying to find what's important in what they sent, and if anything, I'll take away some of their stuff because I feel it's too busy and I want to really bring out what they've already done. So
on a record, will you try and start from the same kind of starting point for the drums for each song and tweak from there, or kind of start fresh?
So the question is, do I start at the same place with the drums as I move from song to song? And I usually will try to, only because drums are so many microphones usually, and they're lately not necessarily recorded with good drum kits and good rooms and things. So they take a lot more figuring out than most things, just because there's so many tracks usually. So I'll always try, and the way I mix, most of my processing is parallel, so I can easily just import auxes from one session. So I always try and do that, and then it never works. But, you know, I sort of have a template, but every song ends up being really different because the part that's being played is really different. Usually the dynamics within the performance are different, so that means the drums start to sound really different. Also, people forget to tune things, so one song the snare's up here, and the next song it's down here, and then you realize they're cutting between two takes with two different snare. Like there's so much chaos in a drum kit that usually it's generally the same, but there are a lot of specifics that are different. So.
Those are some pretty good questions. Now I think, shall we give away some free plugins?
Hell yeah!
Okay, does everyone have a raffle ticket? If you do not, see Derek over here in the black McDSP shirt. Not